Today we'll be talking about one of the most utilized collections here at the library, which is the Langston Hughes papers. The papers contain letters, manuscripts, personal items, photographs, clippings, etc. Mike, feel free to go to the next slide. And it includes a lot of objects that document the life of Langston Hughes. The collection was a bequest of Hughes's estate while he was alive and after his passing, circa 1940 to 1967. Now, within these papers are a variety of wonderful Christmas memorabilia by Hughes. And today, the gracious Willie Jennings and I will be going through a few items that Hughes himself wrote and received. So to get us in the Christmas spirit, I would like to start with one of Hughes's Christmas poems, which is a Christmas story. Christmas story. This poem actually has multiple versions. Now, the poem was originally published in 1951, and Hughes went through 6 endings before finally submitting it. Now, we will hear from Willie Jennings read that original 1951 published version before we go on. Willie, I will now turn it to you.
Thank you so much, Tubyez. So this is the 1951 version. Let me just say as we begin that Langston Hughes was a man for all seasons. He was one of the first poetic voices many of us in the Black community learned growing up. His poems seeped into everything, every school and community and church event. I remember adding Langston Hughes' poems to the regular recitations at Easter, Mother's Day, and of course, Christmas. So it is quite fitting to read these gems at Christmas time. So this is Christmas Story, first published in 1951. Tell again this Christmas story. Christ is born in all his glory. Baby laid in manger dark, lightning ages with the spark of innocence that is the child, trusting all within his smile. Tell again the Christmas story with the halo of his glory, halo born of humbleness, by the breath of cattle blessed, by the poverty of stall, where a bed of straw is all, by a door closed at the end, where only men of means get in. By a door closed to the poor, Christ is born on earthen floor. In a stable with no lock, yet kingdoms tremble at the shock of a king in swaddling clothes, at an address no one knows, because there is no hotel sign, nothing but a star divine, nothing but a halo bright about his young head in the night. Mary's son in manger born, music of the angel's horn, Mary's son in straw and glory, wonder of the Christmas story.
Thank you, Willie. Mike, feel free to go to the next slide. Now, as you can see from these first 3 endings here, Hughes went through a lot of annotations. When he drafted poems, he'd like to physically mark up his typescripts and made it abundantly clear of the things he liked and didn't like in his drafts. Now, you can tell from sort of the hyperbolic crossouts here, the arrows and the general word switching, it's almost like we're in the room with him as he goes through these different drafts. The play was originally named, as you can see on the first item there, it was originally named A Ballad of Christmas, which he soon crossed out and renamed A Christmas Story. Now, the biggest note to take away from these edits in the poem is he decided to end with sort of the purity and innocence and trust of the baby Jesus. At one point in the 3rd ending, I believe, he decided to delete that entire ending and skip to Mary, son of strong glory, wonder of the Christmas story. There aren't too many assumptions we can sort of make about why he decided to change what he changed, but like this, things like this sort of allow us to be in that person's mind. As you can see with these final 3 endings, thank you, Michael, he finally came to a set decision to use that large stanza that he crossed out and switched the last stanza, Mary's Son and Strong Glory, Wonder of the Christmas Story. You see, he decided to keep that stanza previous to it. Now, like I said, we don't exactly know why, but I personally love the addition, and it's a great addition. And the archives at the Beinecke allow us to draw inspiration and go back in time and live what we were currently reading or hearing about a person today. Now, believe it or not, this isn't the last edit that Hughes makes to this Christmas poem. When Hughes released his play, Black Nativity, on Off-Broadway in 1961, he included this poem. Can we go to the next slide, Mike? And Willie, I'm actually not going to have you read this. It's fairly similar, but there are small things that he changed. Now, Black Nativity was originally written by Hughes and the show was performed off Broadway December 11th, 1961, and was one of the first plays written by an African American to be staged there. As you can see from the typescript dated right there, November 1961 by Hughes, he only made minimal changes to this text. I assume it was sort of to fit the rest of the gospel ensemble that was presented in the play. For example, I believe, yes, he changes the very first word from tell again the Christmas story to hear again the Christmas story, as if we're hearing the gospel to pass it on. He also adds, because there's no hotel sign, nothing but a star divine, nothing but a halo so bright above his young head in the night. The biggest change was sort of the removal of nothing but the wondrous light of innocence that is the child, trusting all within his smile. Perhaps that was to make the song sound better, or maybe it just didn't sound right to him. But these are questions that we can ask and see how decisions like this affected the rest of his writing, other people's writing. It's a great thing to analyze. Can we go to the next slide, Mike? Now, I want to get into something a bit more fun. Now, Hughes kept a lot of things. Some might even call it hoarding. But to archivists and bibliomaniacs, general history lovers, this is such a treasure. As this pertains to the holidays, Hughes kept most of, if not all, of the Christmas cards that he received over the years. You can see from this quick photo here that I placed that he kept greeting cards from friends and family for multiple years. Now, I haven't gone through all the boxes. I actually have a few of the boxes right here next to me, but it's pretty safe to assume that he has decades worth of Christmas cards. Someone feel free to email me and correct me if I'm wrong. I haven't gone through all of them, but as you can see from the dates, you have multiple years of Christmas cards and greetings gathered. Can we go to the next slide, Mike? So here are just a few examples of the wonderful cards he received. Now, the best part about seeing these is that we know from reading about his life, whether that's from an autobiography or general text, we know of all the relationships he had with other well-known figures. So these allow us to see more of the personal side of those relationships that we read about. Now, we have a wonderful card here by Len Yutang, who was a Chinese writer, translator, poet, editor, who actually worked with Hughes on the editorial board of the Common Ground magazine, which was a literary magazine by the Common Council for American Unity. This is a great card because Hughes was one of the first African-American writers to sort of set foot on Chinese soil and sought relationships with other ethnicities, cultures for a sense of acceptance and kinship in a racially prejudiced country. For his autobiography, Big C, actually, he states that he didn't like Columbia, the Ivy League, and it was the racial prejudice that he experienced that prompted his departure. He realized that it was at that point in his life that in order to remedy the stupidities of color prejudice was not from an Ivy League, but rather to see different races beyond the US borders. And that's what he began to draw on common experiences of racism that affected the Chinese and African Americans. So this note is just an attestation to the genuine relationships he kept with those other cultures, specifically in this sense, Chinese culture. Now there's also a card here from known as the father of the Harlem Renaissance, Alain Locke. Alain Locke is most well known for his publication, The New Negro, an anthology of poetry, essays, plays, music by Black and white artists. He was a great interpreter of African-American literature and art. And as simple as this card is, as you can see, it's just as simple: with every good wish for Christmas and the New Year, Alain Locke. As simple as it is, I love it because of their relationship. Now, Langston Hughes, this brought me back to something Langston Hughes wrote in his autobiography, The Big C. He states the first time he met Alain Locke, and it's just a great reading. He states, someone knocked at his door in Paris, and he states, "Qui est-il?" which is French for "who is it?" Hughes had asked through the closed door, and he was stunned by the reply. A mild, gentle voice answered, "Alain Locke." And sure enough, there was Dr. Alain Locke of Washington, a little brown man with spats and a cultured accent and a degree from Oxford. The same Dr. Locke who had written to me about my poems and who wanted to see me almost 2 years before the fleet of dead ships anchored up to the Hudson. He had got my address from the Crisis in New York, to whom I sent some poems from Paris. Now in Europe on vacation, he had come to call. During the next 2 weeks, the middle-aged Locke, then a philosophy professor at Howard University, snatched the young Hughes from dingy Montmartre and took him to an extravagant march through ballet, opera, gardens, and the Louvre. This was the first time they had met, but after more than a year of signing letters, Locke had come to Paris flushed with amorous feelings. The feeling was mismatched. Each man was trapped in the other's fantasy. Hughes appeared as a scruffy poet who had fled his studies at Columbia for the pleasures of bohemian life, while Locke was this little brown man with status and degrees. So, as normal as this card may seem, this just really highlights the closeness of the relationship. One, that the relationship existed, but two, you're seeing just a nice, friendly example that they had a relationship. And you have this card right here. And then last but not least, we have a nice card by the Academy Award-winning actress Hattie McDaniel, who was the first African-American to win an Oscar for her role, her supporting role, I believe, in Gone with the Wind. Now, it's always quite amazing to see how these influential figures were just as human as us and did humanizing things like writing Christmas cards to their friends. Now, Willie Jennings will read our next poem, which is Christmas Eve, Nearing Midnight in New York.
The Christmas trees are almost all sold, and the ones that are left go cheap. The children almost all over town have almost gone to sleep. The skyscraper lights on Christmas Eve have almost all gone out. There's very little traffic, almost no one about. Our town's almost as quiet as Bethlehem must have been before a sudden angel chorus sang, "Peace on earth, goodwill to men." Our old Statue of Liberty looks down almost with a smile as the island of Manhattan awaits the morning of the child.
Thank you, Willie. Now, before I turn it back to Willie for our next poem, I just wanted to show you another thing. Now, there's a great little list right here. We have something that's very interesting. We have a list of not only things he sent, but also things he received, all the cards he received. He was so organized that he created detailed long lists of all the cards and gifts he received from his friends and colleagues over the years. You can see both well and not so well-known names on this list. As you can see from the very top of the page, this was just a list from Christmas of 1945, which means he continuously had done this for multiple years. Once again, I haven't looked through all of the folders. Reach out to me if I'm wrong to see, how long he kept this up. But, this in itself is unfathomable to me. I can't even tell you who got me a gift last year. There's also a wonderful gift list here, right on the right-hand side. And those are gifts he received from different people. I just like to point out that in a lot of these lists, this is just one example of the list, he receives a lot of ties and cigarettes. So in my opinion, this was sort of the proper New York poet starter pack. Once again, when we're fully open to the public again, I implore you to dive into this collection and fully immerse yourself with all that we have to offer. But now I'm going to turn it back over to Willie to read our next poem, which is Christmas Time.
A merry time is Christmas time, when bells do chime. A happy time of holly wreaths, when mistletoe its jest bequeaths. A holy time, when from afar shines the light of the Christmas star. Christmas time, the season when angels sing goodwill to men, peace on earth, goodwill to men.
I love that poem. Now, before I turn it back to Willie once again for another reading, I want to show you one more Christmas card here. Now, there's a great card I found from Mary and Ted Ward. Ted Ward was a wonderful Chicago-based playwright, best known for his play Big White Fog. And I would like to give a quick shout out to Melissa Barton, who is Beinecke's curator of Yale's collection of American literature. And she helped me transcribe the text that you see here on this card. So this note comes from Ted and Mary, and it reads, "With orchids for your excellent column in the Chicago Defender. Many thanks for the poems, particularly Freedom's Plow, which is perhaps your best to date and certainly a major contribution. As well as my personal regrets for failing to write heretofore, I trust you know our love for you and will consider this a reminder provoked by the warm and friendly season of the year. Mary and Ted Ward." Now, I haven't looked in the archives for the correspondence between the two of them or the three of them, but I can certainly assume that they were a close pair. Both from this letter and also Hughes was involved with Ward, as well as some very well-known names, Paul Robeson, Richard Wright, Edna Thomas, Powell Lindsay, and more when they formed the Negro Playwrights Company in 1940, which was a theatrical organization born out of the widespread culture of the Harlem Renaissance. And I also love this note because I myself, when I first read this poem, I was a huge fan of this piece of work because it was an optimistic poem about reaching for civil liberties that nations tried to hold from minorities. And it's great to see that it was well received the same way when it was originally published. And you're seeing it sort of in real time or not real time, but you get what I mean. When it first came out, you're seeing great responses from someone else who is thought of as a very well-mannered and creative person who does things like this himself. So that was just wonderful to see. So I had to point that out. Now, as we draw closer to the end of our program, Willie Jennings will actually close us out with a bit from Freedom's Plow, which is exciting, and also Dare, which is another poem of Hughes's. Now, Freedom's Plow is actually a couple of pages long, so Willie will be reading an excerpt from that. And I want to thank everyone for joining us this evening, and I will leave you with a final reading from Professor Jennings.
America, land created in common, dream nurtured in common. Keep your hand on the plow, hold on. If the house is not yet finished, don't be discouraged, builder. If the fight is not yet won, don't be weary, soldier. The plan and the pattern is here, woven from the beginning into the warp and woof of America. All men are created equal. No man is good enough to govern another man without his consent. Better die free than to live slaves. Democracy. To all the enemies of these great words, we say no. And now the little gem, Dare. Let darkness gather up its roses, cupping softness in the hand, till the hard fist of sunshine dare the darkness to stand. And if I may, I'd like to close us with a very brief ecumenical benediction. In the season of offering gifts, inside the grace of the Holy Child, may you give to those you love and to yourself the gift of hope and the courage to say to the dark night, I am the sunshine. Amen.